Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you for joining us for The Art of Change, a conversation with classical artists of color. My name is Dee Baskin, and I'm a board member at Co.Laboratory and the facilitator for today's panel. We're very fortunate to have this team of professionals here to share their experiences and expertise so that each of us has the opportunity to learn, reflect, and act on ways to ensure classical arts are more equitable, diverse, and reflective of our community. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping points to make sure that this program works smoothly for everyone. First, if you are watching us live, there is a chat function on the right side of your screen. We invite you to use this chat function for your thoughtful questions. We will answer questions at the end of the conversation. Second, I want to recognize that some parts of this conversation may be uncomfortable. I ask that you acknowledge any feelings that come up, set them aside for later, and stay present with us for the next hour. Thank you. Now I will introduce our panelists. Since we have published bios and we'll learn more about everyone as they share their stories, I'll say names and type of artist as a reminder of who's with us today. First, we have Gabrielle Skinner, music artist, Darius Morton, musical artist, Emilia Mettenbrink, musical artist, Dasan Douglas, ballet artist, Rachel Seeholzer, ballet artist, and Christian Warner, multidisciplinary artist. So I would like to start with the first question. Most people are familiar with the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion and how important they are. However, it's one thing for an organization to hire a person of color and say, hey, everyone, look at our diversity. It's something very different when that person of color feels safe to be their full authentic selves in a majority white environment. Many of you have worked in different places around the country, not just here in Minnesota. So I'd like to start with you, Gabby. Have you ever felt like you were truly safe in your creative workspace? And if not, can you maybe give an example of how your creative workspace has not been as safe and as welcoming as it should be?
Hi, Dee. Thanks for the lovely introduction. I think that question is rather dense and kind of complicated, and obviously talking about hard things. An easy way to start is just to talk about a quick personal experience. I've worked in diversity fellowships, which are kind of aimed at training students that identify as BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, Person of Color. And in my experience, it's always been this concept of catching up almost to the point of I played a lesson once for a orchestral colleague of mine, and after I had done a mock audition for them, they were silent and I was waiting for comments, and their only response was, oh, I didn't realize you were going to be that good. And it stopped me for a second because I was kind of taken back, like, who did you think I was going to be? Just sort of a pity case for the orchestra, just another grant, just someone to put on a poster because I'm not predominantly white. And I think another way to answer this question of safety is to talk about the fact that I'm half white, and a part of, I think, what my safety net has been in the past is to not embrace the side of me that is South American. I instead, I switched everything from where I was shopping. So I shopped at the same places as my friends, and that I didn't go out in the sun as much, so I didn't get too tan and look a little bit too ethnic. So I think, to answer your question, no, I've never truly felt safe. And the only times I've even created safety has been through trying to act more white, or trying to act like my colleagues that were from a white family. And it's really hard mentally. And then, over my career, I've met incredible musicians mostly through the Sphinx organization. And it's really taught me to embrace the fact that I am multiracial. And it's really highlighted the fact that in certain jobs, I've had to now reaccommodate myself and learn how to be confident with who I am. And it's hard. I still struggle speaking up sometimes because I'm afraid if I speak up, I'm going to lose a job or be judged or whatever. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, Gabby, for sharing your experience. And I imagine it doesn't just happen to music artists. Does anyone else from another discipline want to talk about their feelings of safety in their creative workspace?
Hi, everyone. So some things that I've noticed is even with our directors, they sometimes make it where we don't feel safe. Where I've danced, this is what my 17th year professional, and up until the last couple of years, you could see the segregation in companies. Like you would see all the people of color on one side of the room, and all the other like white people on the other side. And directors kind of fed off of that, and they kind of challenged us against each other, where they would be like, oh, well, this person's doing this, you should be able to do this. And I always feel that as a person of color, we have to work so much harder than a white person because we're always being looked at and being ready to let go. Like they're like, oh, well, you're not doing so well, or this is not. So I feel like there's never a safety net. Like I've never felt where I could just go in a company and dance. Like I always felt like, okay, I fell out of that turn today. That means that they're already looking at me to let go for the next season. So I think feeding off what everyone's probably going to talk about later is I don't think I've ever felt safe. Even to this day, I feel a little bit better in my environments, but I have never fully felt safe in the arts.
Thank you, Jason, for sharing your story.
I as well am a ballet artist, and I'd have to say that I agree with there not necessarily being safety in a ballet company. I remember one time we did Serenade at a school of mine, and I had the part where I got to pull my hair out. And in rehearsal, I just had my natural hair, and the ballet mistress came up to me and said, for the show, you have to straighten your hair. You can't have that hair on stage. So I had to straighten my hair. Years later, I was a trainee with a program, and they were doing Swan Lake, and, the ballet master announced in front of everybody, if you are dark-skinned and you are cast as a swan, you have to paint your skin because black swans are distracting. So we are already told that we are distracting. We're not really welcome. Even if you are good and you match everybody else in the room, you are distracting. And it's something that, you kind of just brush off because you're like, I'm just lucky to be here. But that's something that, yes, that needs to change. There needs to be safety for everybody in class, for no matter what you look like. So yeah, I definitely agree with there not being all the safety for us, and there needs to be.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And then I'll move on to the next question, just expanding on this idea of, creating change and creating safe space. Darius, could you give us some ideas on how folks in Minnesota specifically can avoid being passive about creating change?
Yeah, I think it's hard because exhaustion is a thing. Personally, just to give some full disclosure, I'm really scared right now. I had a lot of things that I thought I wanted to say. I think I have to revise a lot of those things just because of the way things are. But I'm going to try to keep things like really, really, yeah, here we go. Here's a story for you guys. My experiences as a singer have been pretty bad because of race. My My name is Darius. It's pronounced Darius, but in a rehearsal room, it could be pronounced 4 different ways. Sometimes I'm referred to as another black man in a rehearsal room or at a gig with an arts organization. Or there have been incidences of microaggressions and other rather blatant racist remarks that need to be unnamed. I shouldn't have to talk about these things with you all right now, but I do want to talk about what BIPOC artists in your community are ready to do to help work towards what we're doing in the streets. I think that my BIPOC colleagues, I'm 23, for example, and opera is really expensive. You have to travel, it's like thousands of dollars to get to places. For example, for me personally, right now I'm living in Des Moines because I'm supposed to be a young artist at Des Moines Metro Opera, COVID. But I was only able to audition for that one thing last year because I had $35 in my checkings account. Something in the opera community that is happening right now is independent patronage of singers, musicians. I mean, it happens in classical music in general, and it's happened since the beginning of classical music. I think there are really, really tangible things that we can do for resident BIPOC artists in Minnesota. I think they're allies who want to, put their money where their mouth is in a way that excites them, in a way that they're passionate about. I think that we can start initiatives for BIPOC artists to receive instruction. I can't pay for voice lessons. And how am I supposed to learn how to sing well or good? I can't. Well, I do. You practice. You have to practice. We have to search out all of these other things and break our backs just to reach out to someone and say, hey, please, I'm begging you, invest in me. Give me half of the money that you give my white colleagues and see what I do with it. I'll keep things short because I don't want to get in trouble, but thank you guys so much for listening to what I have to say. I think that we can just do the work. And I think that BIPOC people are ready to meet you there. I think there are people that are ready to be gracious and that are ready to seek the same reconciliation and healing that the Minneapolis community is seeking with the police and in the streets. I think we can do that in the arts, and I don't think it's hard because people in the arts actually have money. I'm just ready to see it.
Thank you for sharing, Darius. And Gabby, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of tag on what Darius is saying, because especially in the performing arts, financial burdens are a real thing. And until, at least for string players until recently, it's a little different for us, but I had mentioned the Sphinx organization only recently. It's amazing that they've created a program that is financially supporting musicians that are Black or Latinx identifying for auditions, which is awesome, but it's only a start. And I think just also addressing in Minnesota, I'm new to Minnesota. I actually moved here from Houston last year. And I think something that I've come back to recently due to a brilliant colleague of mine who I had a conversation with recently is addressing this passiveness. We can't be passive anymore, and we have to look for answers because we've been passive for how many years now? And I really think that a huge part of this is this lack of cultural belonging that a lot of us, I think everyone wants to belong. And there isn't a place for us there. And as we said about the safe spaces, there isn't something carved out for us. And I think that it's important from here going out, not only to maximize Blackness, to maximize music that's not written by Germanic, Eurocentric composers, we need to minimize the whiteness first so that we can make room for all cultural belonging. And I think in this, instead of, 4 diversity fellows that, your orchestra might, or your opera or whatever program has a diversity program, maybe instead of just saying 4, why don't we create a whole opportunity for a slew of artists to come through? Why is it only 4? Why are orchestras allowed to say, oh, I play viola, so I'm using viola as an example. Oh, well, the viola section doesn't really have a space for you, so we're only really going to take these people because they're open to having a fellow, or they're opening to mentoring somebody. Why is that an option? I think that's an incredibly passive way of rejecting more artists instead of, I don't know, I think there's a lot of, just from my time here in Minnesota, there's a lot of opportunity for new programs. The one that comes to mind is Minnesota Springboard for the Arts. Why don't we create more opportunities for our artists?
Thank you, Gabby. Jason? Jason, I need you to unmute. I can't hear you, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I hit it twice. To add on to that, Minnesota is full, like the arts organization has so much money. And I think if we actually allocated the money properly, we could help artists that are of color get the training that they need. I think part of the problem is I feel nobody wants to be uncomfortable. And culturally, a lot of arts only thinks in the Eurocentric white way. But if they really dig deep and learn their history, especially in dance, a lot of dance comes from African movement. And I think by educating the audiences and whether it's the board members, donors, we can really start to pull from that money and pull people out of their uncomfortable zone and maybe create ballets or symphonies by Black artists and make, challenge them to listen to something that's different than Tchaikovsky, or challenge them to something that's different than Swan Lake. Most companies rotate Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella every other year. There's so many beautiful people of color choreographers out there creating these masterful works, but never being seen. And it's because people don't want to be uncomfortable. And that's something that we need to strip away, or we will never make changes.
Thank you so much, Jason. And I'll move forward with the next question, because we've seen, multiple examples just in life, as well as in arts communities, examples of people and organizations trying to create diverse programs, trying to give statements about equity and so on. And the result has been tone deaf and not helpful. Emilia, can you talk to us about steps we can take to make sure we avoid tone deaf social justice programs, projects, and productions?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the question. So I'm a violinist here in Minnesota. I recently have had the opportunity to do more concerts and productions and opportunities to perform works that are not simply of the Germanic, Eurocentric variety. I fear that sometimes it becomes a bit of tokenism. I think it becomes something they do on, the special education concert or when a special guest is in town, rather than just making it part of the subscription series that goes on throughout the year. So I think it's important to make it a highlight because it is part of your normal programming rather than something significantly different. Or if you present it as something significantly different, to make it something that continues, rather than one performance, have it be a series, so that you can involve interest that might last rather than something that is a flash in the pan. And then I think if you do those concerts that are for social justice, that come as a reaction to an incident that has occurred in your community, let it be an actionable event. Let it be something more than just playing some pieces by that group of artists or to highlight a certain community, but also to give your audience something to do, something to take away and grow from, so that it doesn't become, again, something that happens and is over, but instead becomes a movement rather than a moment.
Thank you so much, Emilia. Did anyone else want to add to that?
I think Emilia really, she just said it well. Yeah. I think it was just very well said. I don't want to.
I agree.
Ruin what you said.
I agree. Thank you. I think it was great. But well, we can move on to the next question. And a lot of what we talked about already just kind of ties into needing organizations to really live and breathe their mission and their DEI statements. And it really needs to be a culture, not just, individual sporadic efforts. Jason, can you talk to us about creating authentic change in arts organizations, and especially in the realm of getting more people of color involved in all aspects of an organization, like artistic positions, board member seats, and etc.?
Some of the things I've noticed, especially living here, I was up north this weekend and driving back, just looking at the different billboards, and that's something right away. When arts organizations do try to do, they're like, oh, then we're going to do a series where it's all women or people of color choreographers. The billboards are only put around predominant neighborhoods. They never go outside of that box. So automatically you're losing audience members because they're not seeing themselves. And if you were driving somewhere and you saw a poster of someone that looks like you, you're like, oh, maybe this show might be something I'm interested in. So that's definitely something I think we can work towards, is actually trying to expand out of this little bubble of comfort. Again, like I was saying, we have to be uncomfortable of like only posting stuff in the Twin Cities. We have to go out a little farther. Other things is, I noticed, like growing up, there are a lot of satellite schools. There are a lot of companies that have their like official studios, and then they have a satellite school, which is great. But one of the issues with the satellite schools is they don't hire the same caliber of teachers that they hire for the main school. They'll hire someone straight out of college who's never taught before, because they're like, oh, it's just a satellite school. These kids, they won't know the difference. You're already knocking dancers down that might be your next principal dancer because you don't think highly of them. So that's a big issue. They're getting all this money to help create diversity and take these programs into areas that would normally not be able to get this training, but yet they're not fully doing it. They're taking, a certain percentage of it and then putting the rest of it back into their main school. These kids already have the funding. They're already paying their tuition in full. This other set of kids are getting scholarship for a reason. So we need to really look at those programs and make sure that the money is being allocated properly. Also, the division of these programs, where, like Emilia was saying, we'll have a series for one season and then we'll never touch that again. That needs to keep continuing each season so that we can build and build and build to the fact that we don't hopefully never have to talk about making things diversified again. If we're only doing it as a one-off and then never touching it again, how can you say in your mission statement that you're trying to create a diverse program when you actually aren't even implementing that for more than one season? And mind you, that might be 2 weeks out of your whole 30, 40 week contract. I think also creating arts organizations like governor schools, which some states have, or arts high schools, where they're getting proper training, where they're getting ballet, jazz, tap, African. Same in music, where they're getting musicians that have worked in the field and are masters in their field, not getting someone that is doing their internship to come into a school and teach these kids, because they're still learning themselves. How can you expect them to teach the next generation? So I think we really need to push and also create positions in companies where there is someone that's looking to making sure that everyone's feeling comfortable and they're on the outside of it. They're not standing on the inside waiting for being like, oh, well, I'm going to take the artistic side because, they pay me. We need someone that's just literally on the back being like, okay, this isn't going right. Let me step in and make sure that everyone's feeling safe. I think those are the steps we need to take to get rid of having to always talk about, let's make this diversified.
Thank you so much, Jason. And Gabby, did you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I'm just, again, I want to piggyback off. I mean, most of these artists I've just met in the last few days, and I'm just so inspired by them. So I'm going to piggyback off Jason, and also just talk about this lack of longevity within our school systems. And it's not just a Minnesota thing. I think it's a whole United States thing where does the funding go? Where are the arts disappearing to? You know, I went to one of those governor schools when I was in high school, and the experience was way more inclusive than going to conservatory 4 years later. I mean, it was to the point of, you know, my teachers knew that I was a low income family, and they drove me to New York so I could meet teachers, because they knew that it was hard for us to make that happen. And for other reasons, my parents were like, don't be a musician, you'll be poor. But, you know, these supportive environments are so crucial for our young people. And, you know, not to like dig a whole like new subject matter on this question, but there are huge pipeline issues in this country with how we're addressing music education for our kids and how we're providing, like Jason was saying about just hiring some college kid, you know. I mean, I was that college kid that was collecting a paycheck, but you can't just send us to a community that needs us. And, you know, on that note, all of these, I don't want to call out orchestras and say that they're doing a bad job, because there are initiatives within orchestras, I think. But the problem is half of them, they go to one school and then they might see them again in 3 years. And I don't know if we ever have that conversation of how that actually can negatively impact a group of students. They feel forgotten. They feel abandoned. They got to see one white string quartet once. Why don't we have more lasting relationships within our education systems? Why don't we have more examples of musicians of color to look up to?
Thank you so much, Gabby. And just, you know, going off of what you and Jason were saying and really talking about youth in the arts, a lot of passion for the arts starts when we're young, but for most youth of color, and I want to emphasize Black youth especially, there can be, you know, financial barriers, education barriers, keeping them from pursuing that passion. And Rachel, I know you've worked with young people in the arts. Can you tell us from your experience how professional artists can help with reinventing the economics of classical art forms and how these art forms are taught so that youth and Black communities can have the resources and interest in classical arts?
Yeah, I love this question because it's not just a question with an answer. It's a discussion, and it's the next step moving forward. What do we do now? And I kind of want to start with an experience I had last fall. I have been living in Richmond, Virginia for the past 6 years, and I was asked to be a teaching artist for an inner city school. For those who don't know what an inner city school is, it's that school district in an impoverished area. You know, these families have high unemployment, criminal rates are high, housing is inadequate. And, you know, when I was asked, first thing I was like, I'm going to Misty Copeland this. I'm going to just inspire these kids. They're going to just love ballet because I taught it to them, right? And I've been teaching for a decade now. So I went to this school, and right away I realized I don't know what I'm doing. These kids had very little interest. I would ask them to do something, or I would teach them something, and these were 6th graders, and they would say, you can't make me do that. I don't want to do that. That's not cool. Don't ask me to do that. And I was like, you're not bad kids. I don't understand. Like, why can't I get it through to you? And, you know, I take it on myself as, what are you doing wrong? There's something wrong with the way you're teaching. And there is, because I have always taught in, dance studios where the kids are paying tuition. And now I'm in a school where kids can't afford tuition. These kids don't go to a dance studio because they don't have the opportunity to. And it just sort of dawned on me that these kids have something more important to think about than dance. They, am I going to eat tonight? Or a family member, are they in the hospital? Are they in jail? Like, they have things that are more important than the arts. Yet we as artists know that the arts is sort of a way to get away. It's sort of a way to express ourselves. And so I sort of realized that we need to figure out a way to reteach specifically ballet in a way that will interest these kids. They don't see people who look like them. These kids were actually, the entire class was Black. And even though I am of mixed race, they don't see people like me really in ballet. If you think about the stereotype of a dancer, people say, they're tall and they're thin and they're white and they come from a wealthy family. And, what is it that we can do to change that? And, we do see slow changes, but, if you think about story ballets, which Jason was talking about, Sleeping Beauty is French, Cinderella is French, Don Q is from Spain, all these, Nutcracker is a German tale. We're talking about European stories that we are presenting, but these people of color, we don't have stories about us in ballet. We don't have anything to represent us. And so, my idea of how we can start that change is what Jason was saying, and I love that he had said this already, is we need to start telling tales and stories of people of color, and not just create a ballet for it. You have to have choreographers of color, composers of color. You have to incorporate other dance forms in these ballets so that these kids are looking on stage or they're looking at these billboards and they see people who look like them doing things that they would do. And I think that it would be so great for those kids to see that, and that would change the teaching of it. I'm not going to go into a primarily Black school and say, do y'all want to learn Cinderella? Because they don't. They want to learn something that is closer to them, something that means something to them, that it's their history, it's part of their culture. And I think that's just a start. We have to represent, or what's the point of being in the classical arts if we can't represent people of all colors and all ethnicities?
Thank you so much, Rachel. And Jason, do you want to add to this discussion?
Yes, to piggyback off of Rachel, I'm going to try to keep it condensed because there's a couple things that my brain was going like this. Okay, let's go with the first one. A good way to start to segue into creating new ballets is you can take that same story ballet and change up the way the characters are, aka Creole Giselle. How many times have people actually seen that ballet? It's the ballet Giselle, but they made it Creole, which means it looks like people like us. But it's never been exposed to other companies. The only company that's done it is DTH because it's a predominantly Black company. Why hasn't a ballet company like P&B, who they have a huge following, never thought about doing that? Oh, because they only have a few people of color in their company. That doesn't mean you still can't do that kind of ballet because it will read to your audience members. So that's one thing. I think another thing is, say a person is disabled. They go through special training as a teacher to work with people that are disabled. When it comes to working into these art organizations, like for people of color in these rural areas, they don't give you any kind of special training. They just say, oh, whatever, these kids won't know the difference. Go out there and do it. That's not helping these kids. We're out there to show them that, hey, you can be the next Misty Copeland or Lauren Anderson or Carlos Acosta. You don't have to only do sports. That's one of the biggest things I noticed is when you're an African-American, they push you into sports. That's all you can do, sports. Not realizing, guess what? A lot of those professional athletes have taken ballet, have been in the band, have done orchestra. They don't tell the kids the history of that. maybe if the kids realize that, they might be like, oh, I'm a little more interested in learning something like this now. I think another big thing is making sure that in big companies, or just any company, whether it's a symphony or the orchestra or a ballet, modern company, that we have people in the artistic staff that look like us. In this country right now, outside of companies that are Black or Asian or Latino owned, there's no people of color in the artistic positions. So that's another big thing. When these kids are looking up and they're like, wait, no one looks like me on stage or in the office. So what's going to make me feel attracted to coming to this kind of environment? So those are really big things that we have to change, like drastically right away.
Thank you so much, Jason. Amalia, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about kind of a positive experience that I've had in education when it deals with representation. And I think, so I've been 3 years now performing with the Sphinx Virtuosi, which Gabby's also part of that organization in other ways. Sphinx is a larger organization trying to increase the diversity of classical music. But Sphinx Virtuosi is this group of string ensemble players, all of color, and we tour. And we do play the big stages. We play Carnegie Hall. We do all those huge stages that are important for musicians of classical music. But we also spend our days off between and when we're in a city going into schools. And we do this and we see it as important as our performance at Carnegie Hall. We spend just as much time on rehearsals and our presentation to those kids as we do when we have critics in the house at, the greatest art centers in the world. And that the reason is because kids know the difference. And we can't bring them second-rate, third-rate performance and ask them to be interested. So we bring them first-rate performance. And the difference is tangible. All of our education performances, we have excited youth. Not only excited because they're seeing people who look like them on stage, but they're seeing an extremely high level and they want to know how they can do it too. And the response is remarkable, and it's very different from the performances that I give to youth within the other companies that I might work for. I do education concerts with Minnesota Orchestra. I do education concerts with St. Paul Chamber Orchestra and other local organizations, and it just doesn't land the same. Because I don't think that we put the same amount of importance in what we're doing. We dial it in a lot of times, and we don't have the representation. And I think something that happened in Minnesota this past year, it actually was a missed experience, but it was on the docket, and then COVID happened, was they invited the Sphinx Ensemble as an organization, the Sphinx Virtuosi, to come and play a subscription concert with their orchestra and be highlighted soloists, but also then join the ensemble as a whole for the second half of the performance. And it marks a change in the way we are presenting that music. It's not a special event. This is a solo group that we are presenting to our normal audience. We're doing this concert 3 times this weekend. And they behind the scenes invited us to do education opportunities in schools here in Minnesota and all of those other activities. And it creates a different perspective, both for audiences in the concert house, but for youth who maybe get taken by their parents to see the show, or when we get into those spaces. And it just creates a different atmosphere. And I think that we need to focus on the atmosphere that we're presenting so that it doesn't feel like it's outside of the norm, but rather that it is part of what we as people of color can and want to look like in our society.
Thank you so much, Amalia. And a lot of what we're talking about really seems to overlap with these ideas of classism and authentic representation in classical art forms. So, Christian, could you talk with us, and especially from your perspective as a multidisciplinary artist, how do we re-engage with the ideas of classism and authentic representation in classical art forms?
Yeah, this is a kind of a loaded topic with a lot of things that come up. So in an effort to try to focus and hone it in, I'll use my experience mostly with dance and ballet, and other or other world forms, I guess. I think it's important to understand that this idea of classism in ballet and dance, it's a Eurocentric idea, so that inherently excludes everything that doesn't fit that image. You know, it's represented in our media and reinforced in literature, in our attire, or what your body should look like, and how it should present itself. You know, um, I recently had an experience where someone told me that I wasn't a right fit for a company because the director wouldn't support what I was because the standard is tall, white, and ballet, which I, kind of had to raise my eyebrow at because it's like, okay, well, I've studied ballet for a long time and I think I can do it well. So it just kind of already shut the door, which brings me to my next point, is I think we should look at how the technique is supporting the artist versus how we're trying to support this technique. It's only the artist that can bring this technique to life, and bring forth what we understand as living and breathing art. So we can take away this idea of the technique as this holy grail of information that we have to climb towards and start seeing how it truly serves, how it will look on me, how it would look on Jason, how it would look on anyone. It's going to look different. But I think that's what makes it real and effective. You look at Lauren Anderson from Houston Ballet. She didn't look like the others, but you cannot take your eyes off of her. You look at Arthur Mitchell. He did not look like the others. The technique, he used it to serve him. I think these are just great examples to look at how we can start to begin to change this idea. And in an effort to move towards inclusivity, I think it's important to understand that our ideas have to change. We have to take the strength of classicism and the tools that it gives us to better create a world that represents our community. Again, it's not meant to serve the technique, it's meant to serve us. And I think that rings true throughout any culture. Lastly, I think we should really start to educate ourselves on other art forms other than what we consider as classic. I find it ironic, especially with ballet, when we say that it's classic, it's the foundation of dance, when truly these world forms predate the origins of ballet, and we're not even beginning to talk about like our indigenous cultures. They've been dancing long before we got here, and that movement, that history is rich. And how can we start to educate ourselves on those styles just as much as we educate ourselves on ballet and these other Eurocentric ideas? And the US has a rich history of American dance and modern and jazz dance, which is really was powered and driven by artists of color. So again, as we begin to think about how we can restructure, as a Black artist, I've had to learn about the European dance styles. I think the script should flip a little bit and see how we can also inform ourselves in other forms. And I think Rachel brought up something super important, that seeing is believing. As a youth, I was so fortunate to have worked on The Lion King. And when I saw those dancers, I'd always loved dance, but until I saw those dancers, I didn't know that it was possible for someone that looked like me. And being the wonderful humans that they are, on my 13th birthday, they bought me a ticket to see Alvin Ailey. And to this day, my grandmother always brings up, she saw me change in that show. And I remember I was kind of, I was just so deeply affected, and I went deep into, all the gears started turning, because for the first time I saw, oh, like that is the technique as how it would look on me. I saw them doing all the things that were preached to me about that I couldn't do because it didn't look a certain way. And then later in my education, when I saw Sidra Bell and then I saw Roderick George, I saw a contemporary take on these things. And I said, oh my gosh, like there's a whole world that's accessible to me and people that look like me. And no one told me in my youth. So I think it's important to, again, take what we know and the strength of this idea of classicism and don't limit it to a certain group of people based off of an appearance or a community. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Christian. And Jason, did you want to add to this?
To add to that, we are the power to make the difference. And with that, what I'm meaning is, I can't remember who said it at the beginning of the conversation, but most of us, and I know I'm not the only one, especially especially in opera, about like all the forums, we put on this persona of who we are when we walk into that white building, and we're like, this is who we are. We're not from Patterson, New Jersey. We're not from here. We speak very proper. We don't bring our own culture in with us. So how can we expect people to change and invite that culture if we're never actually presenting ourselves in that way? We're so afraid ourselves because, and it's an uncomfort zone where we're like, maybe they won't keep us if we show who we really are. But I think we have to start doing that because our culture is fruitful. Like all these dance forums, music, it comes from these African people who are just out in fields, trying to do something to keep themselves entertained because they don't have anything else. But we're not bringing that into the studio, so we can't be true artists to ourselves until we let our culture come out of us. And what Christian was saying, the first time I really felt movement was Revelations. When I saw Revelations, I was like, whoa. And then years later, getting to work with Robert Battle and him saying, you're not being true to your soul right now. I need you to move from your soul. But I was so used to like, this is the classical form and this is what you do. I think we have to challenge ourselves now to bring our culture in and stop switching from like, okay, now I talk this way when I'm around these friends and this way when I'm in this kind of environment. We have to just always be our authentic selves. That's the only way I feel we can really start to demand for more exclusion and culture to come in.
Thank you so much, Jason. And Rachel, did you want to add to this?
Yes, I do. I just briefly, because I know we're on a time constraint, but I think that some people might be a little bit offended by us saying these things that we're saying, but I think it's important to clarify that we don't want to take away from these classical art forms. We want to add to it. We want everyone to embrace more, because there's always room for more. There's always room for new things. And no, we're not saying, invite everyone to ballet and we're going to forget what they've done for the past, few centuries. No. We want to add to it. We want to be inclusive. And I think that there is room for more. And I know that there's room for more. And I believe that these ballet companies and orchestras and operas have it in them to change. And I think that, it's easier to say, no, we don't have room for that. We don't have time for that, but you do. And I think that's just something that us here on this panel are trying to say is there is room for change, and, we are going to be the ones to start it, but we all can do it. But that's it.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And as I said in the beginning, we did reserve some time for Q&A, and it looks like we have a question that says, you've all shared so many powerful insights and ideas. How can the public, the audience, listeners, etc., support you? Are there ideas you've named that you want to lift up or new ones to share? And Gabby, did you want to start?
Yeah, well, first of all, Rachel, wow. I think that's just kind of a perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about with this. I mean, what we're all talking about, this uplifting, and we're not trying to nix things. We're trying to, I hesitate to say improve. I personally say improve, but I can't speak to the whole community is trying to do that. But I think that, you can't just go into a company and say, all right, sorry, white folk, we gotta fire half of you so we can hire people of color. That's not the point. I think the point of initiatives we can take is to grow, is to make new programs, and not just like, oh, let's create an all Black ballet company, or let's create an all BIPOC orchestra. How about instead create new partnerships? I think earlier I mentioned the fact that it's so hard in the arts to get a job. so hard. I can't speak to the ballet dancers, but for orchestra players and for opera singers, it's an audition. You get 5-10 minutes to make something impressive behind a screen or in front of a panel of people, and you hope that they like you. And I think that I mean, the screen is what keeps it fair. I will never say to take down the screen. In fact, I say keep the screen up as much as you can. But I think that there needs to be new initiatives. I think there needs to be new opportunities for us to speak and for us to be heard. And I think it's vital to have our white colleagues listen. I think to answer that question, half of the battle is listening and inviting us to important conversations.
Thank you so much, Gabby. And Christian, did you want to add?
Yeah, I'll add something that really impacted me, and as in all of these conversations that have been happening recently, the actress Angelica Ross said, as we begin to make these changes, there will be discomfort, but we can't be afraid to continue to engage. And this idea of failing forward is absolutely necessary and also unavoidable. We'll continue to make mistakes. We will mess up. You will mess up as you try to understand these ideas of inclusivity, but it's important to not freeze and just take it with as an experience and a learning lesson and keep moving towards this goal or this vision of what we would like to see. And every time you experience this wall of discomfort or you're walking around eggshells, understand that your artists of color or your colleagues of color, that has been the norm for so long. And again, as we have continued to push forward beyond those feelings, it's important to cultivate that strength of your own and continue to be with us in this new era of what I hope is change and what we like to see.
Thank you so much, Christian.
Yeah.
And I don't see any other questions, so I would like to ask a question of my own. As I said in the beginning, I am a board member at Ballet Co.Laboratory, and a board of directors is another important leadership arm of an organization, even though our role is limited. Like, we're not involved in day-to-day decision making, we're not involved in HR, we're much more big picture, but that big picture still has a huge impact on the organization. And I just, would like to ask, what kinds of things can, we as board members do to, relearn what classical art must be? How can we work with artists to make, the classical arts environment better for everyone? Amalia, did you want to add?
Yeah, well, I wanted to first follow up with the first question that one of our audience members asked about, like, tangible, actionable things that they can do. And I think something that's important is if you're going to concerts and you're maybe giving what little funds that you have towards an organization, organizations do listen to all donors, not just the big ones. They receive statements with every donation that comes in. So don't be silent. Be the person in the room or the person in the email chat who's like, I gave $10 and it's all I could give. And I will give that $10 again because I want to see this type of performance. I want to see this in my future. Because if orchestras, operas, ballet companies, arts organizations see a want, a desire, a monetary value in a specific type of production that they need to be a part of, that's what's going to make change happen fast, because the dollar speaks. And so if you are giving, or if you simply are a ticket holder, tell them what would make you buy a ticket again. They want to know. And then Dee, I need you to reiterate your question so that I don't forget what I'm actually speaking of.
Well, just, as a board member, we're much more big picture. We're not involved in, day-to-day and HR sorts of things. Can you tell us how, we can, rethink, what classical art must be? How can we work with artists to make sure that we're making, the environment better for artists of color?
Well, I'm not sure if this comes from a board perspective, but I'd love to have more arts organizations have positions within the organization on the administrative side that deal with safe space, with providing an avenue for people to be open if there's a problem, and have someone whose role within the organization, it has to do with the diversity and inclusion and respect of those within that organization. So there isn't ever a question, if there is an issue that comes up, of who can I speak to? Is it okay for me to have this feeling and voice it openly? But there is an avenue, there is a way, there is a safe space, so that it doesn't get shoved under the rug, and also so that it doesn't get taken not seriously.
Thank you so much, Amalia. And I also really liked, even though you were answering the previous question, talking about listening to the donors and what they're wanting. So I think that's really important for board members as well. And Jason, did you want to add to the question? Sorry, Jason, I can't hear you. Can you unmute?
Yeah, sorry, I keep hitting the bump twice. Not the best with technology. To add on to that, having the board members go out into the community, not just to the donors, but really reaching out, whether it's like a creative arts festival or a barbecue in the park, where they're getting the community's ideas and they're actually listening, because you never know who might be at that barbecue. There might be a person that might be your next biggest donor, but because they aren't really enjoying what they're seeing on the stage, they don't want to donate to the art. So if you're really listening to them and they see that you're listening and you're creating programs and ballets and symphonies and plays that represent what they want to see, your audience is going to grow. And instead of having to let people go, like Gabby was saying, oh, now we're going to get rid of half of the white dancers, you wouldn't have to. You would be able to expand the company from 25 dancers to 35 dancers one year, then so on and so on. Going back to the board, over my last couple of years dancing, one of the biggest issues we've had in the companies I've been in is the board having too much control over casting, hiring, and the season. And the board is there to support the company, not to dictate what the company is going to do and what dancer can do that. And I call on the artistic staff and the artistic team to take back that power and make sure that they're actually representing their dancers the way they said they would, and not letting the board do that for them.
Thank you so much, Jason. And I know it's 2:00, but I really would like us to answer another question in the Q&A. And so this will be our last Q&A question. The question is, in this in-between time for performing arts and education due to COVID-19, do you see opportunities for reimagining building relationships between artists and students? And Gabby, would you like to say something with this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I could answer this similarly to the other question. I think part of it is listening, and as we've talked about, starting these uncomfortable conversations. I really think that, obviously maybe this isn't a conversation a 4-year-old student could comprehend, but absolutely have this conversation with your third graders. I have a 7-year-old brother, and this isn't like a race thing, but my family raised him to be, from the get-go, use the right terms for things. He asks the big questions. And I think kids are amazing. And I think that what we need to stop limiting what their knowledge of things and what we tell them. And I think especially, I think several of us are educators, having more platforms like this and making it accessible to our students, and to encouraging other artists to talk about this problem, because it is going to be probably 30 years before we see like a true tangible change within the arts field, because it's a generational problem, and it's systemic, and it's rooted in from 5 years old and up with our students and who has access to all of this. So yeah, to answer that question, I think it's just about keeping this dialogue open. And I think the opportunities are in these talks, are in Zoom calls, and, you know, searching for artists in your local communities that are BIPOC identifying, and giving them the opportunity to talk to your child, or maybe your child's friend, or anyone, or going into schools and giving these talks. I think it's super important to, yeah, talk about it. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Gabby. And Rachel, did you want to add?
Yeah. So what is, not that COVID-19 is nice, but what is nice about this is teaching has already been reimagined. We are already teaching kids digitally. When COVID happened and we all went into quarantine, I taught classes through Zoom. I'm sure most of you have taught through classes in Zoom or took a class on. But what is great about this new digital situation that we are in is now we are making it more accessible. We are making all art forms more accessible because we don't have a choice. How are we going to teach? How are we going to get these messages across? And now we have multiple platforms to do it. And what's nice is our companies are already, you know, putting their season online. So, you know, you can access these things better than we used to. And quite honestly, a lot of companies were avoiding putting things online because of rights, and they don't want, you know, you want to watch our material, you better pay a ticket price. But now we can just do it because we don't have access to going into theaters at the moment. And I think that's just a great way for us as artists, especially professional artists, to make it you know, our responsibility to what are we going to put out there and how are we going to put it out there. And so we were given this opportunity with this pandemic, and I think that's something that we can use to our advantage and for the good of humanity, quite honestly.
Thank you, Rachel. And Jason, did you want to add?
Something to add on to what Gabby and Rachel, with all the stuff that we're doing, I think we can give kids more of a voice. Like, you know, us adults are constantly talking about things, how we're going to change this and change that. But let's be honest, the kids are the next ones that are going to follow through after us. And we need to get their input a little bit more. Like, what do they want to see? Especially kids are amazing with technology. So we can ask them, like, what would make you want to sit down at home right now and watch an opera? Like, what interactive game might come with that opera? Or what interactive game might come with that play? Something to really challenge them intellectually, but also get them motivated to want to be part of the arts. We never ask those questions. And I think we need to open that dialogue more with kids, because they are a lot smarter than we think. We talk down to them a lot, but they're super smart. I mean, like, look at the way they can do technology quicker than most of us.
Thank you so much, Jason. And Emilia, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted a different perspective on education. I think we often think kids when we think education, but I've had the opportunity, or maybe I gave myself the opportunity, to play small concerts on my balcony every night for my neighbors. My neighbors didn't know me, so I've created community. They all come outside now and listen for 5 minutes at 6 p.m., which is really great. But I've taken from that an opportunity to educate my audience. And I, as a person of color, am very aware, in a way that some of my white colleagues in the industry are not aware, of the African-American compositions that are out there, performers that are amazing that they should be listening to. And I've had the opportunity and kind of a captive audience to say, this is another way that you can listen to classical music. And these are artists you might not have heard of before. And this is a great violin concerto, and you've never heard it before. And I've also had the opportunity to talk to people who live on my block and have never heard or even thought about opera before, and now are thinking to themselves, I would like to see what this person does in real life, and they might buy opera tickets when we go back to work. And I think there's a big opportunity within the arts community to introduce people to a genre they didn't think they liked or didn't even know existed. And I keep hearing in the arts right now about how orchestras and ballet companies are going to die because of this pandemic. And I think there's an opportunity to reach an audience we didn't even know was out there. And I wish we'd start having that conversation. So I am educating an adult audience every night on things that I hope they can get excited about the way I'm excited about. And the way I do that is by being my excited self about the thing that I love and sharing.
Thank you so much, Emilia. And I would just like to conclude the discussion today by thanking everyone in the audience for being here and for your commitment to learning and change. And I want to ask you to do 3 things now that you've been part of this conversation. First, think about 1 or 2 concrete steps you can take to increase equity and diversity in the classical arts organizations where you work, volunteer, or otherwise support. Second, plan. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Plan how you can transform your intent into impact, what barriers or pushback you might get, what you're most nervous about, and what allies and other resources you have. And third, act. Take action. I also want to say thank you so much again to Gabby, Darius, Emilia, Jason, Rachel, and Christian for sharing your expertise and your compelling stories with us this afternoon. And I would also like to thank Ballet Co.Laboratory for hosting. Thank you so much again.